Our next presenter is Elsie DuBray of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and the Mandan Hidatsa Innu-Riconderoit Nation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Like Cindy said, my name is Elsie DuBray. I come from the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where I'm enrolled and on my dad's side, and the Mandan Hidatsa Innu-Riconderoit Nation on my mom's side, up on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota. I am also a student at Stanford University. I will be starting my sophomore year next week, actually. And I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share my little bit of experience with you guys. This works. I'm going to talk to you guys about my experience with buffalo. And it all starts with my dad. He was born and raised on the Cheyenne River Reservation, and he has done a lot of work in the buffalo restoration movement. He's worked with our tribe, started the what was once the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, and now he manages our family herd, which somewhere between all of that, I was born. And I'm so fortunate to grow up on my home reservation and my dad's home reservation and where his family has been throughout our history. And my dad's experience with the land and the buffalo industry has allowed me to grow up immersed in my culture and on a platform of grass-fed buffalo meat, which I think is pretty awesome, and I consider myself really lucky. Growing up here, though, I also was growing up amongst the unfortunate realities of reservation life. I was surrounded by those who were affected in my friend groups, my family, cousins, aunties, uncles, who are subjected to extreme poverty and unemployment and addiction and alcoholism and suicide and depression and hopelessness. And given this reality that I was surrounded by, and then all of the great things I described before, I became really passionate about how important buffalo restoration is to people back home. So while I wasn't conducting westernized, quote-unquote, research at the age of 5 years old, I was still conducting science. Science in its purest form, born from observation, asking questions, discussing things, listening, retelling stories, which is a really important part of indigenous science, is oral tradition and storytelling and the passage of knowledge. And so my interest in science continued all throughout my childhood, but it wasn't until kind of my later high school years that I really realized that this could be something I could make a career out of, and that I felt like I had found what I was meant to do. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the cultural significance of buffalo. And so while most people are familiar with the fact that Lakota people have utilized all parts of the buffalo, and that they were the primary food source, not a lot of people really understand the true weight of their sacredness. And so it all starts with the worldview of indigenous people all across the world, and that is that we are all equal. We are all related. All living things, plants, animals, people, are all equally deserving of life and healthy life and respect on this planet. And we see that in our Wind Cave creation story, that man and buffalo are created equally. We are brothers. And it defines us as the Buffalo Nation, or the Buffalo people. And so they aren't just sacred because we use all of them physically. I mean, when we say we use all parts, we mean all parts, and that comes from both the physical side and the social side. Buffalo have served as our model of society. Their kinship and clanship served as a model for how Lakota culture was created, and that minimized inbreeding, ensured survival, that was established to preserve family. They taught us the value of generosity and appreciation and respect, and observing how the buffalo took care of the land, not overgrazing, stomping down grass that needed to, living in harmony with the prairie ecosystem, taught our people how to really respect the land, and created this really beautiful understanding of how important our Mother Earth is. And so by providing everything, Buffalo created a really self-sufficient economy for our people. And all of these observations and lessons are what really define our culture. And so my research first started in high school with the hopes of attending a science fair, the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. And I was looking for a research question, and my dad had told me this story one time about a man who got cancer. And I won't go into detail about the story because otherwise I'll go over my time limit by like 4 hours. But he told me this story about this man with cancer, and this man went and saw his medicine man, and he told him that he needed to have the doctors take the tumor out and rub buffalo fat in that cavity. And I mean, it was this big ordeal and trying to figure out how that could possibly happen. But long story short, he got it done and his cancer never grew back. And I mean, that may seem like a long shot, but it's really not, because there's science. There's Western science behind that too. And I was just fascinated by this, and I wanted to really study it. But I didn't know how to get my hands on cancer cells as a junior in high school, so I figured I needed a plan B. But I was really interested in health then, which is something I never really realized that I was. I wanted nothing to do with being a doctor. I knew that. Nothing against that. It's just too much for me. And so I started researching, and I got down this rabbit hole of diabetes. We all know that the diabetes statistics are pretty horrifying. You'll see between the years 1994 and 2004, type 2 diabetes increased by 68% in Native youth. That really freaked me out, and I had no idea beforehand. And so I decided I wanted to do something with diabetes, and I knew that because of my family's buffalo operation, I wanted to do something with that. I didn't really know how to connect them. But through my research, I learned from a doctor, Dr. Lyle Best, that elevated triglyceride levels are characteristic of diabetes. And I knew that triglycerides were the #1 component in animal fats. And so I decided that that was going to be my bridge. Most people don't look at meat, buffalo meat, and diabetes and try to put the two together. It's usually focused on sugar. But I wanted to take it on. And so that's kind of how I first got started. And so my research project started with, I took 4 different samples, grain-fed and grass-fed, buffalo and beef, which you'll see, I didn't label them, but starting from left to right, you'll have grass-fed buffalo, then grass-fed beef, grain-fed buffalo, and then grain-fed beef. And the fat content there is pretty visible. I performed all this fancy chemistry at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, I had a fantastic mentor who really made all of this possible and was very generous. And I did this research, and I extracted the lipids from this meat and concentrated them using rotary evaporation, which you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And then I got some results. And so you will see that the grain-fed beef on top, this is a % total lipid, or fat lipid is a fancy word for fat, content is much, much higher than any of the other samples, which is unfortunately, when we eat beef today, that's most likely what we're eating. You'll see at the bottom that grass-fed buffalo meat has the lowest total fat content. And I mean, this is pretty visible in just the marbling of the meat. And you feed an animal grain to fatten it up. We know this. So what's the real point? I also made some visual observations. On the right-hand side, in that picture, the right-hand flask, you'll see the fat that I concentrated from the grain-fed beef. It is white. It was pretty nasty. It kind of freaked me out. I don't eat any beef anymore. That's not a joke. And on the left, you'll see some of the fat that I concentrated from the grass-fed buffalo meat. And these came straight out of the fridge, so they're both hard, but the left one you'll see is yellow. And I was like, what the heck is that about? That's because that's grass-fed beef, or grass-fed buffalo, excuse me. And in our grasses, I learned, and I went down this entire rabbit hole, and I was just absolutely fascinated because I'm a major science nerd, that grasses have the diet of the animal is extremely important in the nutritional value that they pass on to us when we eat them. And so the yellow color that you see comes from the fact that they're eating grass, they're getting vitamin A, they're getting beta-carotene, which is a pigment that's giving it that color. And just to be able to see that, to go from taking these samples of meat to seeing that in my hands was really incredible. And before I refrigerated them, the one on the left was also liquid, which meant at room temperature, which because of the double bonds in the hydrocarbon chains, they are unsaturated. These unsaturated fats, and which we know are the healthy fats. They're really good for us, essential to our brains and our skin and our absorption of vitamins and minerals. And the right one was mostly solid and white. And so you don't, that wasn't great. And you can also see this. I performed infrared spectroscopy that characterized the peaks on the left show that band right there signifies an ester group, which is characteristic of triglycerides, and specifically saturated. So you'll see that grain-fed beef contained way more of the quote-unquote bad fats, and on the right hand you'll see that not only was grass-fed buffalo low in the bad fats, that it was high in the good fats, these healthy essential fatty acids that we need to live our healthy daily lives. And so I thought that was just incredible. Senior year, I took this a little bit further because I wanted to go back to the International Science and Engineering Fair, which, by the way, was a really incredible experience. And so I wanted to refine those results a little bit, dig a little deeper, quantify them. So this shows separations of those fats further. I didn't get a ton of data because I had to develop the methodology to do so. This isn't a science that has been done a lot, which was actually really cool. And so I hope to continue that and look further into the actual specific healthy fats in the grass-fed buffalo meat, like the omega-3s and omega-6s, and see how much we're really getting from the meats, and just to really prove how, on a scientific and on a chemical level, this meat is truly nourishing for us. And I was also kind of introduced to food sovereignty at that point. Anything I had ever heard of it involved a lot more agriculture and farming efforts, and that's not really what my family does. And so I supported it, but I didn't really see how we fit into that. And there's a film coming out, documentary that I'll be featured in, Gather Film, and it is a film focused on food sovereignty efforts all across the nation, and I think it's going to be really incredible. But it was my first kind of real introduction to food sovereignty and where I fit in that, and now I'm pretty passionate about it. So right now, and what I've done recently, the research I've done recently, I've kind of put a hold on my scientific research because I did not know what the heck I was doing when I first got to Stanford and didn't know how I was going to continue, and kind of wanted to take a break. But I did other research in the program in writing and rhetoric. I wrote my final paper on food sovereignty, and it is called Federal Failure: Native American Food Sovereignty, Restoring Health, Not Repeating History. And then I got to take some courses in the Native American Studies department there, which is excellent. And I wrote multiple papers about buffalo, shocker. I talked about the economic health, how that plays in with that paper. And then I took wellness education classes that kind of really, they didn't have anything to do specifically with what I was talking about, but they really helped me realize how all of this contributes to my understanding of health and wellness, to me and to others. So in the future, what I plan to research, I'm currently planning on being a human biology major, and I want to minor in Native American studies. And I want to continue my buffalo research at some point. I have a zillion questions that I have to ask. I have my whole life's work cut out for me just in buffalo, and that's not even the end of it. I want to look into the genetic components. I want to look into the medicinal plants. I want to look into all of it. And I also am, one second here. Okay, so also being in college, like I said, I kind of gained this new understanding of indigenous wellness. And while I've known and I've trusted and believed in the importance of buffalo in my family and to my people for about as long as I can remember, it wasn't kind of until I got to college that it really hit me. I did all this research, and I was finally able to have a cohesive understanding of how food sovereignty and poverty and health and wellness and happiness all were equivalent to each other, and how they all had everything to do with each other, specifically with buffalo in my case. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that I wasn't surrounded by buffalo anymore. I had a really hard time my first year. I didn't think it was going to be so hard for me moving that far away from home. I mean, I was excited to be in California and by the ocean, and I hadn't ever lived off the reservation before, and so I was excited to leave. And when I got there, I realized just how much I missed home, and that I didn't just miss my family like I knew I would. I missed the buffalo, and I missed the birds, and I missed the air, and I missed looking out my window and seeing our beautiful river every single day, and I missed seeing grass, and I missed everything. And that dynamic relationship with the buffalo, and it really took its toll on me. And so that's kind of when I really started to understand just how important this really was. And I also wasn't really getting any access to buffalo meat, so I don't think I was able to think straight. Anyway. So kind of coming full circle and back to the title of my presentation, I mentioned a lifelong study, which is kind of ironic because I'm one of the youths here and I'm only 19 years old. But I have been surrounded by buffalo my entire life. It's been all I've known. And it's been a large majority of what I've done the past X many years of my life. I mean, the research I did at 5 years old compared to the scientific research I did in high school, compared to the literature I studied in my first year of college and what I continue to pursue. It's been my whole life, quite literally, up until this point. And as I think I've explained, it's the rest of my life. It's not only my future research projects and what I want to do for a career, but it defines the culture that I live with, and that's a part of me, and that I couldn't get rid of even if I wanted to, and I sure as heck don't want to. And so it truly is my lifelong study. And now it's clear that to me, and I hope you will see this too, that it's really important to our culture's health for buffalo to be fully restored, for our people to be truly physically, psychologically, culturally, spiritually, emotionally, ecologically, economically healthy again. And it's really important that these buffalo be returned in a good way. Buffalo, just as we don't want to be treated differently, buffalo don't want to be treated differently. It's important to honor the integrity of the buffalo and how they're supposed to be raised. We don't want to be feeding our buffalo corn. We want to be feeding them the grass that they're meant to eat, just like we're meant to eat the buffalo. And so, in addition to the obvious healing that could happen if buffalo were to be fully restored, is what that would mean as far as additional key components of cultural restoration. You'll hear people talk about language revitalization and food sovereignty being their number one concerns for their culture's cultural revitalization. And to me, I mean, buffalo restoration encompasses all of that. Regarding language revitalization, my dad told me a story about what work he was doing and when he was trying to restore buffalo, how a language speaker came up to him and said, you know, this is it. I've been trying to teach this language, and our Lakota language, and something's been missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and it's the buffalo. The buffalo give us something to talk about. And that was just so profound to me when I heard that. I was like, that's incredible. And it just shows that all of these efforts that are happening across Indian country, that are efforts of cultural revitalization and cultural restoration, are all connected. And for us, buffalo restoration encompasses all of that. And I think that's a really, really beautiful thing. And so buffalo, they aren't gone. They can't be replaced, and they certainly are not a lost cause. And I think it's really important that we honor that, and not doing so jeopardizes the future of our people, the future of our culture, and I really believe that. And buffalo, my research with buffalo, my life, my experience, it's what gives me purpose. It's how I found meaning in my life and my way to contribute to my people, to Indian country as a whole. And it gives me real hope for a brighter, healthier, and more vibrant future for our culture and for our world. And so in the wise words of my dad, who's somewhere in the back, we have to restore the buffalo if we're going to survive as a culture. And I think that's really, really true. And then also in the wise words of Red Cloud, who is Oglala, the bison must have their country and the Lakota must have the bison. And that's pretty much sums up my research. So thank you again for having me and letting me share my life experience with you guys.